Airtime. We all know what it is, and many of us have experienced it. It's that moment on a coaster where you're lifted out of your seat, and it's pretty terrifying, let's be fair. But yeah, this is due to obviously extremely low G-forces that are exerted on riders as a result of going down a drop or over the crest of a hill. Forces are created that basically counteract gravity, and therefore essentially you're lifted out of your seat because obviously gravity pulls us down. And that basically continues until the force of gravity basically counteracts that low force, and then we fall back into our seats and we can enjoy the rest of the ride, knowing that we're safe again. We're lucky in the UK to have a good few moments of airtime on coasters, despite unfortunately a lot of coasters in the UK being more focused on inversions. I definitely think for sure we are due another airtime coaster. But don't get me wrong, there's a fair few good moments of airtime that can be experienced if you go to the right places. But yeah, airtime is personally my favourite moment on a coaster. I just love, the freedom of being lifted out your seat. It's just incredible. I take airtime over inversions any day of the week.
Also, he says.
Also, we just done Hulk, and this is a number 2 coaster. Well, it's actually called the Incredible Hulk coaster, but yeah, number 2 coaster. It's so intense. It really is. Trust me. But yeah, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the top 5 strongest airtime moments that you can experience on UK coasters. This list is going to be down to my personal experiences, so I'm not going to be including moments on rides that I've not ridden yet, because obviously I can't give a fair judgment of those rides in comparison to what I have ridden. So moments such as the airtime hill on Stealth towards the end of the ride, and the second airtime on the Smiler won't be featured here. Those are renowned for being very strong airtime moments on coasters. And oh, an airtime hill on the Smiler, you wouldn't think so with it being such an inversion focused coaster. You wouldn't think you'd have a good airtime moment on there. But yeah, I'm just pre-warning you, so I don't have people in the comments asking me why are those moments not there. The reason is because I've not ridden them and I can't give a fair judgment of them. So yeah, it's only fair I don't include them. But without further ado, let's get into it. At number 5 we have Grand National, and the reason I don't say a specific element on Grand National and just the ride Grand National is because I can't pick a specific hill for this list. They all deliver similar airtime. And yeah, I mean, this ride is relentless in terms of its airtime. You got airtime all the way through it. You are constantly being lifted out of your seat, literally flung out of it and back down again. Time after time after time. And I mean, it's either very enjoyable or very painful, depending on whether you're on a wheel or non-wheel seat. For those who don't know, the wheel seats on wooden coasters can be pretty brutal. Because obviously the wheels are going over the track, and with it being wooden track, it just makes the ride so rough compared to steel track, where if you're on a steel coaster, sitting on a wheel seat isn't that big a deal. If we take Icon for example, I mean, you can barely feel the wheels on that. But yeah, on non-wheel seats, wooden coasters tend to be rougher than steel coasters, but they're okay. And that is the case with Grand National. I like to give a shout out to my friend Josh from Theme Park Mad, who is a Grand National enthusiast. He is very passionate about this ride, and if you hate on this ride, he'll have something to say about it. And let me just say that he is the one that convinced me to go back on this thing after I rode it in 2015 on a wheel seat and had a brutal ride. I've ridden it on non-wheel seats ever since, and it's been brilliant, and I've been actually able to appreciate the airtime, which I could notice beforehand, but I was being shook about like I was in a cardboard box, literally. But I mean, Josh, he'll ride this thing on a wheel or non-wheel seat. I mean, he likes every kind of airtime there is out there, and he doesn't mind a rough ride, let's say. But yeah, shout out to Josh, and hopefully if he lets me use the footage, I'll have some footage on screen of Grand National for you all to see right now. But yeah, it's really good. I mean, a lot of the times you feel like you're almost stood up in the train, like it's that forceful. hence why it's making it to number 5, this ride. But yeah, really enjoyable ride. I think the double down after the first drop is definitely a highlight. That double down there, that's one moment in particular that gives some good airtime. But overall, all the hills and sort of drops on Grand National really give some great airtime. Personally, for the maximum amount of airtime, I'd recommend sitting at the back of Grand National. However, you can certainly feel the airtime throughout the train. Really, it's just if you want the strongest airtime and you want to really be whipped out of your seat, definitely sit towards the back of the train. I recommend second to back row is ideal really for a smooth ride filled with lots of airtime. And that's all there really is to be said about it, to be honest. A brilliant coaster, but best experience on the non-wheel seat if, like me, you can't tolerate a rough ride, because I mean, some of us like it rougher than others, don't we? At number 4 then, we have an entry that may surprise some of you who haven't ridden the ride, and that is the forwards and backwards drop on Revolution. Those electrical winch launches that power Revolution forwards and backwards, because if you didn't know, Revolution is an aerodynamic shuttle coaster that features 2 launches, 2 drops and a very intense vertical loop in between the drops. I mean, even Josh from Theme Park Mad can't keep a straight face when going round that loop, let me tell you that. But anyway, we're not talking about the loop here, we're talking about the drops. Now, those electrical winch launches, as I said, give the train a fair amount of speed, and I mean, the forces provided by airtime are determined by pretty much the speed of the train and how sharply the gradient and the track changes. The sharper the gradient and the faster the train's going over that gradient, the greater the force of airtime you get. And it's fair to say that Revolution's drops are pretty sharp and the train is going pretty fast when it descends them. So pretty much, I mean, when you go forward down that drop, you are whipped out your seat. Equally so when you're going backwards. I'd say the forces provided by these 2 moments of airtime are similar to those on Grand National. However, the airtime is a little more sustained. Hence why I'm rating it a bit higher in this list. If you want the strongest airtime on Revolution, I definitely recommend sitting towards the back of the train. You'll get it strongest on the forwards drop. Or if you sit at the front of the train, you'll get it strongest on the backwards drop. So I mean, there's no real best place to sit on Revolution. I mean, I don't know why I would say best place, but I would say that the loop is more intense if you're at the back of the train, especially when you're going backwards. So ideally, you probably want to be sat at the back of Revolution, really, unless you black out very easily. Otherwise, that might not be a good idea. But yeah, that's all I can really say about that. But even if you're in the middle of the train, you'll definitely still feel some airtime over the forwards drop and backwards drop. And I mean, even if you sat at the front of the train, you'll still feel the airtime forwards drop, and vice versa. If you sat at the back of the train, you'll still feel airtime when going down the backwards drop. So really, it doesn't matter. It depends, you know, your G-force tolerances really, because as I said, you may well be more likely to grey or black out if you sat towards the back of the train. But that's all that can be said there. On to number 3. At number 3 then is where things really start to pick up in terms of the strength of airtime I'm referring to. And here we have the first drop on Megaphobia at Oakwood Theme Park in Pembrokeshire in Wales. Now, Megaphobia is another wooden roller coaster. It's a lot smoother than Grand National though. Well, sort of, but it is still kind of a bit rough and brutal. But yeah, it's located at Oakwood Theme Park and it has some good airtime throughout. However, it's overrated. Honestly, it does not live up to the hype at all. Like, people saying it has like 16 seconds of airtime. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. But one thing that does live up to the hype on this ride is its first drop. You are travelling at speed when you go down that first drop, and it's quite a steep incline as well. It's quite sharp, and you are literally flung out of your seat if you're at the back of the train when going down that, to the point where you practically stood up in the train. I mean, watch this. Here we go. Whoa! First drop. Whoa! But yeah, should also mention that Nick Hudson, whatever, did a soundtrack for this ride recently, so you'll definitely look out for that when you are at Oakwood. I mean, Megaphobia, that first drop really does provide thrills beyond fear. In fact, should I do it in the Nick Hudson voice that he does in the audio? Thrills beyond fear. But yeah, definitely go and check out Nick Hudson, theme park music composer, and he produces some brilliant stuff, including the very terrifying subspecies, does that even make sense, that I'd never go in, but yeah, he does like audio for like Scarefest at Alton Towers, including the iconically brutal maze subspecies. Well, maybe brutal's a bit far, but I mean, I'm scared to go in a scare maze, so to me, it's kind of, yeah. Oh, I don't know what I'm saying, but yeah, it can be a bit painful at the bottom of that first drop. I'm not gonna lie, it can be a bit brutal, but it doesn't take away from it too much. There are some other sections around the ride, however, that are a bit more brutal and that take it away from me, but be sure to check out Megaphobia when you go to Oakwood. On to number 2. At number 2, we have the amazing Top Hat and Immelman on my number 1 coaster. Yes, on the Mack multi-launch roller coaster Icon. Yeah. Now, if you're on the front of the train on Icon, you don't get as much airtime, I will be honest. You do get floater, however, going into that Top Hat after the first launch. And if you don't know what floater airtime is, it's basically, you know, a weaker airtime with forces closer to 0 G. So essentially, as if you're just like floating in midair more, rather than sort of being properly like ejected out of the seat. Which leads me on to ejector airtime, which is what I've been referencing so far pretty much, where you're more sort of flung out of the seat and you experience so-called negative G-forces, like, that really do act against gravity, you know, below 0 G-forces, essentially, like, you know, usually like minus 0.01, between -2, anything between that, because I mean, if you're experiencing anything under -2 G's, that can be really painful, because the blood pressure to your head can get to the point where you actually experience a red out, and that can actually be really fatal. But yeah, however, the floater and ejector you get on this Top Hat are very sustained. So the floater does still pack a punch, even though it's not as strong as the ejector that you get on the back of the train. And oh boy, it's some strong ejector, alright. You were really pushed against the lap bar to the point where you sort of feel like you stood up in the train. However, due to the train design on the Mack multi-launch coasters, and you'll see some footage on screen now so you can see what I mean, you aren't exactly stood up because of how sort of the trains are designed. It just wouldn't be safe really, because of the fact the trains don't have sides, so it's not quite like that, but you know, you really do feel the force. It's just that you're not exactly stood up in the same way you are on Megaphobia, but it definitely feels stronger in my opinion than Megaphobia's airtime. As for the Immelman, you don't really get anything at the front of the train. However, if you sat at the back, you really do get pulled out of it, because it's a sort of like drop, you know, out of the Immelman, coming out of that element. You do get some sort of airtime, ejector airtime, but yeah, nothing at the front there. And then throughout the remainder of Icon's layout, there are some good moments of airtime, but the two I mentioned there are the personal highlight for me, definitely the strongest moments of airtime on the ride. But yeah, on to number 1. At number 1 then, we have possibly a very underrated, well, in my opinion anyway, airtime moment, and it is the airtime hill on Speed No Limits at Oakwood. I mean, what other airtime moment could I include at this position? I'd also like to quickly shout out Nick Hudson again for some audio that he's done for this ride in recent years. I don't know the year exactly. Please say it's the right person that I'm crediting here, and that I'm not like giving credit to the wrong person for something he's not actually done. But yeah, Nick, if you're watching, and assuming it is you, well done, because I mean, I think the audio fits the ride quite well, as basic as it is. It's a pretty basic soundtrack, but it does fit the whole theme of the ride very well, and it really does build up that anticipation for experiencing forces of no limits, because trust me, this ride is quite intense. For those of you who don't know, this ride features a vertical lift hill, and at the top of it you've got a beyond vertical drop of 97 degrees, and it's safe to say that at the bottom of that drop it's quite sharp, so it pulls some very forceful positive G's. If you don't know what positive G forces are, they're basically the opposite of what we've been talking about, where basically you're pushed into your seat and you experience forces, you know, multiple times the force of gravity. In this case, on speed, you're experiencing forces greater than 4G, so it's very, very forceful. And then you proceed up this hill, which is, again, it's got a very sharp crest, and you're travelling at speed over this hill, because I mean, you've gained beyond 50 miles per hour. I think it's like 59 miles per hour at the bottom of this drop. You come flying over this Airtime hill, which is quite a bit lower than the drop, and I mean, you are just flung out your seat, like, because the positive G-forces before it are so intense, it creates this kind of elastic effect, if you get me, where because, and then like this elastic is like released. That's like what it is. Sorry, I'm no physicist, but I'm just giving it all my own interpretation from my own understanding. Please be sure to correct me in the comments if I'm getting this all wrong. But yeah, I mean, this ride pulls minus 1.3 G, which is quite high on the scale of what humans can tolerate, so you really are whipped out of your seat against those over the shoulder restraints. It doesn't hurt or anything, but you can feel yourself against them, and this is sustained for a good couple of seconds while you're travelling over the hill. And I mean, this is possibly the best sensation I've ever experienced on a coaster. Like, I don't know anything that could beat the sensation of flying down that drop the first time I rode it, of which I was terrified going down, and then hitting the bottom of it and going over that Airtime hill. I mean, it's possibly my favourite moment on a coaster ever. I mean, check out this POV of basically the 10 or so best seconds of my life, and you'll see what I mean. But yeah, it's just brilliant, a brilliant Airtime moment. There's no Airtime throughout the remainder of the ride, but I mean, that hill alone, wow, it's incredible. On a serious note, I'm sure that there are plenty of Airtime moments on coasters around the world, you know, especially on some of the crazy Rocky Mountain construction, you know, RMC hybrid coasters like Steel Vengeance and stuff like that. I'm sure they have Airtime moments that are much stronger and much more brutal than the ones I've described in this video. But I mean, speed is just brilliant. It just is. But be sure to subscribe and click the bell to enable notifications so you don't miss out on any future videos similar to this, if you haven't done so already. Thank you for watching. Leave this video a like if you enjoyed it. Be sure to comment down your top 5 strongest UK Airtime moments below. And I'll see you all next time.